when my daughter-in-law looked at me and said, "We got married yesterday." I felt something inside me quietly break. It wasn't loud. There were no tears right away. It was just silence. The kind of silence that fills a room so heavy, even your breath feels wrong for existing. I remember standing there by the kitchen door, holding a small tray of sweets I had made for them for the engagement I thought was still coming. My hands were trembling, but not because of anger. No, it was disbelief. I had waited for that day for years, the day my only son would finally bring home the woman he loved, and we'd celebrate as a family. I'd imagined the house full of laughter, the sound of music, and relatives coming in and out. I even saved up a little money each month just to make that day special. But instead, I was told it had already happened, quietly, privately, without me. My daughter-in-law's voice was polite, calm. She wasn't rude. She just said it as if she were talking about the weather. "Yes, Mother, we got married yesterday. It was a small ceremony. We didn't want to make a big deal." She smiled softly, like it was supposed to comfort me. But in that moment, her words felt like tiny pieces of glass falling into my chest. I looked at my son, my boy, standing beside her. He couldn't meet my eyes. That hurt even more. For a long time, I thought nothing could break a mother's heart more than losing a child, but I was wrong. Sometimes the real heartbreak comes when your child chooses a new life and forgets to include you in it. That evening, as I sat alone in my quiet house, the sweets untouched, I thought about every memory I had of him growing up. The first time he called me Ummi, the way he'd hold my hand when crossing the road. The times he'd say, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll always be with you." I smiled remembering those words and then cried because I finally understood always doesn't mean forever. My name is Farah, and I'm a mother of one. Just one son. My world, my heartbeat, my reason for waking up every morning. My husband passed away when our boy, Adil, was only 6. Since then, it was just the two of us. I worked in a small school as a helper, cleaning classrooms, handing out chalk and papers, sometimes helping children tie their shoelaces. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. And every time I came home after a long day, Adil would run to the door, holding my face with his little hands and saying, "You're tired again, Ami. Sit down. I'll get you water." Those small hands made me feel like the richest woman in the world. We didn't have much, a small rented home, a few old furniture pieces, and a radio that crackled more than it played music. But we had each other. Every night, I'd tell him stories before bed. He'd listen quietly, his head resting on my lap. He always wanted to hear the story of the mother bird who taught her chick to fly. "Will I fly one day too, Ami?" he'd ask. I'd laugh and say, "Yes, my son, you'll fly high, but promise me you'll never forget your nest." He used to nod seriously, as if making a lifelong vow. Years passed, and I kept that little nest warm. I worked extra shifts so Adil could study. When he got into university, I remember sitting outside the office crying quietly. Not because I was sad, but because I was proud. He was growing up, becoming a man. And I thought, one day his wife will come home to us, and our family will be complete. I used to imagine that girl, the one who'd become my daughter-in-law. I dreamed she'd call me Ami, just like Adil did. We'd cook together, gossip about the neighbors, maybe even argue playfully about recipes to hide the sting in my chest. "Of course, Beta," I said softly. "You have to build your life." But when he left, I sat on his bed for hours, holding his pillow and breathing in his scent, the scent of my little boy who once promised to never leave. Weeks passed, then months. We spoke less and less. And then that afternoon came. The day Sada walked into my house with a calm smile, holding his hand, and said the words that would echo in my heart forever. "We got married yesterday." When Sarah said those words, I didn't react right away. I just stood there, frozen, like someone had pressed pause on my life. "We got married yesterday." Her voice was calm, polite, almost rehearsed. My hands tightened around the tray of sweets I'd brought from the kitchen. I could smell the cardamom, the sugar, the ghee, the scent of celebration. But suddenly, it all felt meaningless. I wanted to ask 100 questions. Where? When? Why wasn't I told? But the words wouldn't come out. My throat burned, but no sound escaped. Adil shifted uncomfortably beside her. He looked tired. His eyes were red, maybe from lack of sleep, or maybe because he already knew this moment would come. Finally, I managed to whisper, "You didn't tell me." He looked down. "Ummi, it all happened so quickly. It wasn't planned like that." Sarah added softly, "We didn't want to trouble anyone. It was just a small nikah, only a few close friends. We'll do a proper ceremony later." Later. That word. People always say later when they mean never. I nodded slowly, trying to stay composed. My chest ached, but I smiled anyway. "I see. You did what you thought was right." Sarah looked relieved, maybe even grateful that I hadn't created a scene. But Adil, he looked ashamed. He still couldn't meet my eyes. I remember setting the tray down on the table. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped it. Then, as politely as I could, I said, "You must be tired. Sit down. I'll make tea." It was the only thing I knew how to do, offer tea when my heart was breaking. In the kitchen, I moved slowly. The kettle hissed, and the clinking of cups filled the silence. My reflection in the window looked older that day. Not just older, lonelier. I thought about the day Adil was born, how I'd held him in my arms, small and fragile, and promised I'd never let him feel alone. Now, years later, I was the one who felt abandoned. They stayed for maybe half an hour. Sarah talked politely about her job, her plans for the new apartment, how they were still unpacking. I nodded and smiled in all the right places, even managed to say, "That's wonderful, beta." But inside, I was sinking. When they left, I stood at the gate and watched them walk away together, hand in hand. The evening sun fell across their faces. They looked happy. And I realized something that hurt more than anything else. They didn't need me anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every corner of the house reminded me of him. His childhood toys in a box, his old school certificates, the cup he always used for tea. I sat by the window, the same window where I used to wait for him to come home from school. Only now there was no reason to wait. I told myself I should be happy for him. That's what good mothers do. They let go. They bless their children and step back. But I couldn't lie to myself. This wasn't letting go. This was being left behind. Days turned into weeks. Sometimes Adil called. Sometimes he didn't. When he did, our conversations were short, polite, careful, full of pauses. "How are you, Ami?" "I'm fine, Beta." You both good? Yes, just busy with work. Good, good. And then silence. I could feel the distance in his voice. There was love, yes, but it had changed. It was thinner, like a thread pulled too tight. I tried not to bother him. I didn't call much. I didn't visit. I told myself they're newly married. They need space. But some nights I'd take out the wedding dress I'd stitched for Sarah, the one I never got to give her. A simple ivory fabric with soft gold embroidery. I ran my fingers over the threads, imagining her wearing it, laughing, calling me Ummi. It's strange how dreams can die quietly, without anyone noticing. One afternoon, a neighbor dropped by. She had that look in her eyes, the one people get when they know gossip before you do. Farhabaji, she began gently. I heard Adil got married. Congratulations. I smiled, pretending I already knew everything. Yes, yes, it was small, very quick. She frowned. Oh, I thought you were there. I laughed softly, though my throat tightened. No, they wanted to keep it simple. After she left, I sat in silence again. That's when it truly hit me. The shame. Not because my son married, but because people would think I wasn't part of his life anymore. Weeks later, Adil came to visit. Alone this time. He looked thinner, tired. I was happy to see him, but the air between us felt heavy. He hugged me a quick, half-hearted hug. Then he sat down and began talking about work, money, rent, the usual things people talk about when they want to avoid the real subject. Finally, I said softly, "You could have told me, Beta, about the wedding." He looked down. I know, Ummi, I should have, but Sarah thought it might be better to keep it quiet. She didn't want pressure or drama. Pressure? From me? He sighed. Not like that. She wanted something simple. I nodded slowly. Simple, I repeated. Yes, I understand. But inside, I didn't. Because I would have given them simplicity. I would have given them peace. I would have given anything just to be there. He noticed my silence and reached out, touching my hand. I'm sorry, Ummi. I smiled faintly. You don't have to be sorry. Just remember, next time, your mother would like to be part of your happiness, too. He nodded, eyes glistening. I promise. But promises have a way of fading once life moves on. Months passed. Sarah and Adil settled into their life. Sometimes they visited, sometimes they didn't. When they came, it was spotless, modern. But there were no family photos. Not even of Adil's childhood, not even of our old house. I felt out of place. Adil came out of the bedroom, surprised to see me. Ummi, you're here. I missed you, I said simply. He smiled, but his eyes flickered nervously toward Sarah. It was a small moment, but I noticed it. We sat together for a bit, drinking tea. Sarah checked her phone often. Adil asked about my health. The conversation was polite, painfully polite. After an hour, I said, I should go. Sarah didn't stop me. She just said, it was nice seeing you. I nodded, forcing a smile. You too, Beta. When I reached the bus stop, I looked down at my bag and realized they hadn't even opened the cake. That night, I cried quietly for the first time. Not because they were rude, they weren't, but because I finally saw it clearly. I was no longer a part of his daily life. He had a new world now, A world where I was only an occasional visitor. And that's when the real conflict began. Not between us, but inside me. Half of me wanted to hold on, to remind him of everything we'd shared. The other half told me to let him live his life, even if it meant fading into the background. Every time the phone rang, my heart jumped, hoping it was him. Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. I learned to fill my days with small routines, watering the plants, cooking for one, listening to the old radio, but nothing filled the silence he left behind. I used to wonder if love can survive distance. Why can't it survive neglect? It happened one evening in early winter, the kind of evening when the air smells like wood smoke and loneliness. I had just finished my prayers when the phone rang. It was Adil. Hearing his voice after so many days made my heart flutter, like I was hearing from an old friend. "Ummi," he said softly, "how are you?" "I'm fine, Beta. Just the same. How are you and Sarah?" There was a pause, longer than usual. Then he said, "Ummi, Sarah isn't well. She's been in the hospital." My hand trembled. "What happened?" "It's nothing serious," he said quickly. "Some stomach infection, but she's weak." "I'll come right away," I said without thinking. He hesitated. "Ummi, it's okay. She's resting now. I'll keep you updated." But I didn't listen. I couldn't. A mother doesn't wait for permission when her child, or anyone her child loves, is unwell. I wrapped my shawl tightly around me, grabbed my purse, and left. When I reached the hospital, the fluorescent lights stung in my eyes. I found the room after asking twice. Sarah was lying in bed, pale but awake. Adil sat beside her, scrolling through his phone. When he saw me at the door, his face went blank. "Ummi, you came." I nodded. "Of course. You didn't think I'd stay home?" He opened his mouth to speak, but Sarah interrupted softly. "It's okay, Adil. Let her in." I walked in quietly and sat near the bed. Sarah looked at me weakly, managing a faint smile. "I'm sorry you had to come all this way." "Don't be silly," I said, brushing her hair back gently. "You're family." Her eyes softened for a moment. "Thank you, Ummi." That was the first time she'd ever called me that. It was a small word, but it filled something hollow inside me. I stayed with her for a few hours, making soup from the hospital cafeteria, feeding her slowly while Adil went to handle paperwork. For the first time, it felt like we were connected. Three people sitting in quiet understanding. But I didn't know that this small moment of closeness would lead to the hardest truth I'd ever face. After Sarah was discharged, Adil drove me home. It was a long drive through silent streets. I could tell he wanted to say something. Finally, he spoke. "Ummi, can I tell you something?" "Of course," I said, smiling. He sighed deeply. "I know you've been hurt about the wedding, about how we did things. I wanted to tell you everything, but Sarah, she was afraid." "Afraid of me?" I asked gently. He nodded. "Not afraid of you, afraid you wouldn't accept her. Her family situation, it's complicated." I frowned. "Complicated how?" He looked at the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "Her parents didn't approve of her marrying me. They wanted her to marry someone else. She was under pressure, so we married quietly. She didn't want anyone to know until things settled." I stayed silent. He continued. "She thought, if we told you, you might tell people, and word might reach her family before we were ready. She didn't mean to hurt you, Ummi. We just wanted peace." For a while, all I could hear was the hum of the car. Then I said softly, "And in finding your peace, you took away mine." He didn't reply, but I could see his shoulders shaking slightly. When we reached home, he parked the car and sat quietly, with his head bowed. I touched his arm. "Adil, listen to me. I understand fear. I've lived with it all my life. But you must also understand love and fear cannot live in the same home. One always drives the other away." He looked at me, then really looked at me. His eyes glistened like the boy I once knew was still hiding somewhere behind those tired, grown-up eyes. "I'm sorry, Ummi," he whispered. "I thought I was protecting her." "And who was protecting me, Beta?" He broke down then, quietly, like men do when they've been holding it in for too long. I reached over, pulled him close, and held him just like I did when he was little. He rested his head on my shoulder and cried softly. For the first time in years, I felt the bond return. Fragile, but real. Days after that, things began to change a little. Sarah called me occasionally to ask about recipes. Adil visited more often, bringing groceries, fixing things around the house. There was warmth again. Not the same as before, but something new, something cautious yet genuine. Then one evening, Adil came home alone again. He looked troubled. I made him tea, and we sat in silence until he finally spoke. "Ami, there's something else I need to tell you." My heart tightened. "What is it, Beta?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "We're thinking of moving abroad. Sarah got an offer, a good one, and I've applied for a job there too." I froze. "Abroad?" He nodded. "Just for a few years, maybe longer. It's a good opportunity." I forced a smile. "That's wonderful news." But my voice cracked at the edges. He noticed. "I'll visit often. I'll call every day. You won't be alone. I promise." I nodded. "Of course. You have to go where life takes you." But when he left that night, the walls of the house felt colder than ever. The day they flew out, I went to the airport to see them off. Sarah hugged me politely. Adil held me tight. "Take care of yourself, Ummi," he said. I smiled. "Always." But when I watched them walk toward the gate, hand in hand, I realized this was the moment every mother secretly dreads, the moment your child walks away into his own life and you're left behind at the gate, waving at his back. The silence after they disappeared through the doors was almost unbearable. Months passed. They settled in their new city. Video calls became shorter, messages less frequent. I wanted to hold her. I wanted to smell her hair, to sing her lullabies, to tell her stories like I once told her father. But oceans stood between us. And silence. Weeks later, Adil called again. "Ami, Alina's growing fast," he said, laughing. "She looks like you." I smiled through tears. "Then she must be beautiful." He chuckled. "Sarah says she's finally sleeping through the night." "That's good. You both must be tired." "Yeah," he sighed. "It's hard, but it's worth it." There was a pause. Then I said quietly, "I wish I could be there." He didn't answer right away. Then he said softly, "I know, Ummi. I wish you could too." That was all. But those words stayed with me for a long time. The turning point came 1 year later. I woke up one morning to a knock on the door. When I opened it, Adil was standing there holding little Alina in his arms. I froze. He looked exhausted, eyes swollen from crying. Before I could ask, he said quietly, "Ummi, Sarah left." I stared at him, unable to process it. "What do you mean?" She went back to her family. She said she couldn't do this anymore." He looked down at the baby in his arms. "She left Alina with me." The baby whimpered softly, pressing her face into his chest. Without thinking, I took her gently from his arms. She was warm, small, perfect. The moment I held her, something inside me healed and broke at the same time. I looked at my son, his face full of pain, regret, confusion, and all I could think was how life had come full circle. Once, I had held him like this when his father died, when he cried and didn't understand why. And now, here we were again. Mother, son, and child. 3 generations bound by loss and love. That night, as Alina slept in my lap, Ariel sat quietly beside me. He whispered, "I didn't know where else to go, Ami." I smiled softly. "You came home. That's enough." He looked at me, his eyes glistening. "I'm sorry for everything. For the wedding, for leaving you, for all of it." I touched his face. "You don't need to say sorry anymore. We all make mistakes. What matters is that you came back." He lowered his head and wept quietly, like a child again. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. When I finally returned home that evening, the house felt heavier than ever. Every wall, every photo frame seemed to echo the same question. When did I stop being a part of their lives? I sat down in the kitchen, the same spot where I used to pack my son's lunchbox when he was 10. I could almost hear his voice, "Ami, extra ketchup, please," as if time itself was teasing me with memories that no longer belonged to the present. For the next few days, I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't go out. I didn't even switch on the TV. Silence had become my company. I kept wondering where I had gone wrong. Was I too controlling when he was growing up? Did I make his choices for him instead of letting him find his own way? Or had I just been too blind to see that he was slipping away? I tried to convince myself that maybe it wasn't personal. Maybe they just wanted a quiet, simple wedding. Maybe they thought they'd surprise me later with pictures and a dinner. But deep inside, I knew the truth. They didn't want me there because something had broken long before that wedding day, and none of us had noticed. On the 4th evening after the news, I heard a knock on my door. It was faint, hesitant. When I opened it, I saw Sarah, my daughter-in-law, standing there. She was holding a small cake box. Her eyes looked tired, but her expression was soft, almost apologetic. "Ummi?" she began quietly. I froze. It was the first time she'd called me Ummi since she came into our lives. "I thought you might like some of this," she said, holding out the box. It was a small vanilla cake, my favorite. I wanted to close the door, to protect my heart from more hurt. But something in her voice stopped me, so I stepped aside and let her in. We sat in the same kitchen where I had spent the last few days in silence. The same kitchen where, not too long ago, she had stood with me, learning how to make biryani. For a moment, the air between us was thick with unspoken words. Then she took a deep breath. "Ummi, I know what we did was wrong," she said softly. "I didn't want it to happen like that, but things just got complicated." I didn't reply. I just looked at her, waiting. She went on, her voice trembling slightly. "We didn't plan to hide it from you. We thought of telling you after the engagement, but your son was scared. He said he didn't know how to face you." "Scared?" I repeated, almost whispering. "Of what?" She hesitated. "I- He of disappointing you. He said he couldn't bear to see that look in your eyes, the one you have now." I felt something shift inside me, a small crack in the wall I had built over those painful days. Sarah looked down, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of the cake box. "I kept telling him that you'd understand," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "But he thought you'd never forgive him for marrying quietly without your blessing." A long silence followed. The refrigerator hummed in the background, the clock ticked gently, and I could feel tears building behind my eyes. Finally, I asked, "Did he ever think that maybe I would have been happy to just be there? To see him smile? To see you both start your life together? She nodded, slowly. He did, but he said he'd rather hurt you once than see you hurt every day because of what he chose. Those words pierced me like nothing else. All this time, I thought he was selfish. But maybe, just maybe, he was scared of seeing me in pain. Sarah stayed for a long while that evening. We didn't solve everything, but we talked. For the first time, we really talked, woman to woman, not just mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. She told me how she and my son had been struggling to balance their jobs, expectations, and family. How the idea of a big wedding felt too overwhelming. How they'd argued for days about how to tell me. She told him to tell you the truth, she said quietly. But when the day came, he couldn't do it. He said he'd call you after the ceremony. But then, he couldn't even do that. I could see the regret in her eyes. It wasn't fake. It was heavy, real. I reached across the table and touched her hand. You both made a mistake, I said softly. But I've made mistakes too. I've held on to my pride too tightly sometimes. Her eyes filled with tears. I just want you to be part of our lives, she whispered. And in that moment, I realized that was all I had ever wanted too. The next day, my son whispered into the quiet room, "You deserve happiness, Betha." And for the first time in many days, I smiled. A small, tired smile, but a real one. Over the next few weeks, things began to heal slowly. They invited me for dinner one evening. Sarah cooked my favorite dishes, and my son made tea the way I liked, strong and sweet. It wasn't perfect. There were still pauses, still moments when we didn't know what to say, but there was effort. There was love trying to find its way back. Sometimes that's what forgiveness looks like. Not forgetting, but choosing to try again. One evening, while we were clearing the table, Sarah turned to me and said, "Ummi, we're planning a small ceremony next month. Just family. We'd love for you to bless us properly this time." Her words caught me off guard. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw a young woman who wanted peace just as much as I did. I nodded slowly. I'd like that. And when my son looked up, his eyes glistened. "Thank you, Ummi." In that simple thank you, I felt years of love, regret, and understanding melt into something new. That night, I sat near the window, watching the stars. The sky was quiet, calm. I thought about how life keeps teaching us even when we think we're done learning. Love isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's broken. But it's still love. And sometimes the ones who hurt us don't do it out of cruelty. They do it out of fear, confusion, or love in the wrong form. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It simply lets you live again. When the ceremony day came, it was small, just a handful of close friends and family. They stood together, smiling, with me sitting in the front row. As they exchanged vows again, I felt my eyes fill with tears, but this time they were soft, healing tears. Afterward, my son walked up to me, holding my hand. "Ummi," he said gently, "thank you for giving us a second chance." I squeezed his hand and smiled. "Just promise me one thing," I said. "Next time, don't let fear decide for you." He nodded. "I won't." When I came home that evening, I placed a small framed photo from the ceremony on my table, the one where all three of us were laughing. For the first time, the house didn't feel so empty. It felt lived in, full of memories, full of forgiveness. I whispered to myself, sometimes love forgets its way home, but it always finds it again. And as the night settled in, I realized my heart hadn't broken forever. It had simply cracked open wide enough to let grace in. A few weeks have passed since that small ceremony. Life has started to feel gentle again. Not the same as before, but softer, calmer. The mornings are quieter now, yet the silence no longer hurts. I've begun to find comfort in the little things again. The smell of cardamom in my tea, the sound of sparrows outside the window, and the warmth of sunlight drifting across the kitchen floor. Sometimes I catch myself humming while folding clothes, something I hadn't done in a long time. Healing, I've learned, doesn't arrive like a thunderstorm. It comes quietly, like the slow bloom of dawn after a long night. Every Sunday, my son and Sarah visit. They bring groceries, laughter, and the same small cake she brought me that first day. It has become a ritual, a quiet reminder that love can grow back, even after being cut down. Sarah now sits beside me and asks about old recipes, and my son listens patiently as I tell him stories of his childhood, the time he got lost in the market, the way he used to sleep clutching his school bag, the afternoon he refused to eat until I drew a smiley face in his lunchbox. One evening, my son asked me, "Ami, did you ever stop loving me?" I looked at him for a long time before answering. "Never," I said, "but I did forget how to show it for a while." He nodded, understanding more in that moment than words could explain. Love doesn't disappear when it's bruised. It hides, waiting for a softer hand to call it home again. I think about that day often, the day she said, "We got married yesterday." It still stings when I remember how casually the words fell, like they were nothing more than a line in a conversation. That now, instead of pain, I feel something else, a strange peace. Because that day, as much as it broke me, it also opened a door inside me that I didn't know was locked. I learned that love isn't about control or being included in every decision. It's about allowing those you love to grow, even when that growth takes them away from you for a while. Sometimes when I sit alone in the evening, I light a small candle near the window and watch its flame dance. It reminds me of how fragile and yet how resilient love can be. I whisper a quiet prayer, not for them to need me again, but for them to be happy, to never feel the loneliness I once did. And somehow, that prayer fills the room with warmth. Because when you start wishing happiness for others, you find pieces of it returning to you in unexpected ways. The pain of that day hasn't vanished completely. It lingers like a faint scar on the heart. But scars don't mean brokenness. They mean survival. And I have survived through disappointment, silence, pride, and loss to discover something more enduring than all of them. Love that forgives. Now when people ask about my family, I no longer hesitate or hide the story. I simply smile and say, they made a choice I didn't understand at first, but now I see it was love in its own way. Because love, I've realized, doesn't always follow our expectations. Sometimes it walks a longer path, takes a few wrong turns, and still finds its way home. The house feels full again, not with noise or people, but with peace. The kind of peace that only comes after storms, when the clouds finally part and you can see how far you've come. I still keep that wedding photo on my table, not as a reminder of what I missed, but of what we rebuilt. Whenever I look at it, I whisper the same quiet promise to myself. Keep your heart open, even when it hurts. Keep it open. Because in the end, love is not about never being broken. It's about finding the courage to heal again and again. If you ask me today what I've learned from it all, I'd tell you this. Love changes. It disappoints. It surprises. But it never truly leaves you. Sometimes love just needs time. Time to grow beyond our expectations, time to forgive, time to return home. And when it does, it brings with it something more precious than before: understanding. So, yes, the day she said, "We got married yesterday," my heart broke. But today, that same heart beats stronger. Not because the pain disappeared, but because I learned to hold it gently, to let it teach me grace. And as I turn off the lights each night, I whisper into the quiet room, "I forgive you. I forgive me." And I'm grateful we found our way back. Then I close my eyes, and sleep comes softly, carrying with it the sweet, steady rhythm of a mother's heart finally at peace.